My mother looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You'll never be as good as your brother." Everyone stopped eating. My father nodded. Damian smirked, but I stood up and said something that made the whole room go dead silent. "I'm Archie, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible son, the backup child, the one who worked brutal shifts as a trauma paramedic just to keep my head above water while my parents showered my brother Damian with praise, money, and opportunities one could only dream of. I spent my nights saving lives in hospital emergency rooms, my weekends working overtime just to pay bills that seemed to grow bigger every month. I never complained, never asked for help. I just watched from the sidelines as Damian got everything handed to him on a silver platter. If your family has ever made you feel invisible while lifting someone else up, keep reading, because I know exactly how that crushing feeling of being overlooked tears you apart inside. It all started 3 months ago at what should have been just another family dinner. But this one was special. This one was all about celebrating Damian's big news. He'd landed some partnership with a tech startup, and my parents had turned it into a full production. The dining room in their coastal Massachusetts mansion smelled like lobster and expensive wine. Mom had cooked Damian's favorite meal from scratch. There were flowers on the table, good china, and candles flickering like this was some kind of holiday. I walked in straight from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, still wearing my uniform, exhaustion weighing down every step. "Archie, you're late," Mom said without looking up. Her attention was glued to Damian, who was telling some story about his new office space and the free coffee in the break room. I sat down in the only empty chair, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that nobody else wanted. Damian was glowing, his hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a week. Dad was hanging on his every word like he was announcing a cure for cancer. "And then my business partner said I have real potential for the director position," Damian continued, waving his wine glass around. "He thinks I could be running operations within 6 months." "That's incredible, sweetheart," Dad beamed. "This company really knows talent when they see it." I tried to jump into the conversation. "Speaking of work, I helped save a kid today who nearly drowned. The doctor said my quick response made the difference between life and death." Mom barely glanced at me. "That's nice, honey." Then she immediately turned back to Damian. "Tell us more about the company culture. It sounds so dynamic." Dad leaned forward, completely ignoring what I just said. "Damian's really going places with this startup. They have real growth potential, not like these dead-end healthcare jobs." That's when it happened. The moment that changed everything. Mom looked directly at me with this cold sneer I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Archie, you'll never be as good as your brother. Damian has ambition. He has a drive. He's going somewhere in life." The words hit me like a physical blow. But what made it worse was watching Damian's reaction. He didn't defend me. He didn't look uncomfortable. He just smiled and took another sip of wine like Mom had just complimented the weather. As I sat there staring at the half-empty plate in front of me, something clicked. I'd been paying my parents' mortgage for 8 months. 8 months of $3,000 payments coming straight out of my bank account, while they gave Damian a $10,000 congratulations check for getting a job that paid less than what I made in a month. But that dinner was just the beginning. The real betrayals were still coming. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when I saw them. Pictures of Damian, my parents, and Damian's girlfriend on a luxury cruise ship. Crystal blue water, expensive deck chairs, fancy cocktails with little umbrellas. They looked like they were having the time of their lives. I stared at my phone screen in disbelief. Nobody had mentioned a family vacation. Nobody had even hinted at it. I called Mom immediately. "Oh, Archie," she said when I asked about the trip. "We didn't think you could get time off work. You're always so busy with your shifts." "You didn't ask," I said, my voice cracking. "You never even asked if I wanted to go." Well, it was kind of a last-minute thing. Damian needed to decompress after starting his new partnership. You understand, right? I hung up and stared at more photos. My family is playing deck games. My family ate at expensive restaurants. My family having deep conversations on sunset walks without me. Damian's text came 3 hours later. "Sorry, I thought you knew about the cruise. You're always working anyway, so we figured you wouldn't want to come. Hope you're not mad." I wasn't mad. I was devastated. But the public humiliation came next, and that almost broke me completely. Damian's 30th birthday party was held at the most expensive restaurant in town, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than my grocery bill for a week. My parents had rented out the entire back room and invited 60 people to celebrate their successful son. I showed up after another long shift, still smelling faintly of hospital disinfectant, wearing the nicest suit I owned that still looked cheap next to everyone else's designer outfits. Mom gave a speech that made my stomach turn. "We're so proud of our Damian," she announced, raising her wine glass high. "He's always shown such natural talent, such a bright future ahead of him. Some people are just born to succeed." The whole room clapped. Damian glowed under the attention like he was accepting an Academy Award. That's when Mrs. Peterson, one of Mom's friends, turned to me. "And what do you do, Archie? I know Damian's in tech, but I've lost track of your career." Before I could answer, Dad jumped in with a laugh that made my cheeks burn. "Oh, Archie is still figuring things out. He's working at the hospital, but Damian's the one with the real career. Damian's the one who's really making something of himself." I had just completed my trauma paramedic certification. I was working in the emergency room, literally holding people's lives in my hands every single day. I was making more money than Damian had ever seen in his life. But all Dad could see was his successful son, who posted pretty pictures on social media for a startup that might not exist in 2 years. Mom raised her glass again. "We're just so proud of our successful son," she said, looking directly at Damian while I sat 3 feet away. The room went quiet for a moment, and I felt 60 pairs of eyes on me. Some people looked confused, others looked embarrassed for me, but my parents just smiled and kept celebrating Damian like I was invisible. That night, I went home and cried until my eyes were swollen shut. But the worst betrayal was still coming. I discovered it by accident while helping Mom organize her bills the following weekend. There, mixed in with utility statements and credit card payments, were documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing payments to various creditors, all marked paid in full. I grabbed the papers with shaking hands and started calculating. The payments weren't going to a mortgage at all. Every single payment had been going to cover Damian's business debts, his car loan, even his credit card bills when he had a tough month. I confronted Mom the next day. "You've been using my money to pay Damian's debts," I said, my voice shaking. Mom didn't even look ashamed. "Damian needs to focus on his career growth. He can't be weighed down by debt when he's building his future. You have a stable job. You can handle your own responsibilities, plus help the family. I've been working double shifts to pay what I thought was your mortgage while you used my payments to clear Damian's debt. Archie, don't be selfish. Family helps family. Damian's success benefits all of us." That's when I realized the truth. I hadn't been helping with a mortgage. I'd been funding Damian's entire lifestyle while drowning in my own expenses. He was living debt-free while I worked myself to exhaustion just to keep up with my own bills. But what they didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. Every bank transfer, every payment, every receipt. I kept detailed records for tax purposes, never imagining I'd need them as evidence of financial abuse. While they were celebrating Damian's $40,000 salary, they had no idea I was making $95,000 a year. They had no idea I'd been accepted into a supervisor program that would bump my income to 6 figures. I'd been keeping quiet about something that would change everything. My colleague Dr. Harper had been watching this whole situation unfold. She was the head physician in our emergency department, a woman in her 50s who didn't sugarcoat anything. One day during our break, she looked me straight in the eye and said what I needed to hear. "Archie, you're literally paying for your brother's life while they treat you like a failure. This isn't family support. This is financial servitude." Dr. Harper helped me calculate the exact numbers. Over 2 years, I'd given my parents $63,000. Not just for the mortgage, like I thought, but for Damian's business loans, his car payment, even his credit card bills when he overspent on clothes and vacations. That's when things got interesting. Mom started dropping hints about Damian's engagement. His girlfriend had accepted his proposal, and they were planning a big wedding. A wedding that would need family contributions. "Archie can handle the catering costs," Mom said casually during a phone call. "He doesn't have other expenses like Damian does. Damian needs to save for his tuxedo and the honeymoon." I hung up and started printing documents. Bank statements, payment records, loan calculations, everything I'd need to prove exactly how much I'd been supporting this family while they treated me like an unsuccessful son. Then I did something that terrified me. I stopped making the monthly payment. My phone exploded within a week. Panic calls from Mom. Angry texts from Dad. Even Damian called, suddenly concerned about family finances for the first time in his life. Archie, what's going on with the payments? Mom demanded. The bank called saying they're late. I think we need to have a family meeting, I said calmly. Let's sit down for dinner and discuss everyone's financial contributions. They agreed immediately, probably thinking they could guilt me back into line. The dinner was set for Saturday night. Mom cooked another elaborate meal, probably thinking food would soften me up. Dad opened a bottle of wine like we were celebrating something. Damian showed up with his engagement ring sparkling on his girlfriend's finger, ready to discuss wedding plans and my expected contribution. They had no idea what was coming. Dad started the lecture before we'd even finished eating. Archie, we need to talk about responsibility, family obligations. You can't just stop supporting us because you're having some kind of emotional crisis. This family depends on your contributions, Mom added. Damian's building his future, and we all need to sacrifice to help him succeed. Damian nodded along, completely clueless about where his lifestyle was actually coming from. Archie, I know you're stressed about money, but we're family. We help each other. That's when Mom gave me that same cold sneer, that same dismissive look that had haunted me for years. And she said the exact same words that had started this whole confrontation. You'll never be as good as your brother. I stood up slowly, my hands steady for the first time in months. I looked Mom directly in the eye and said the words that made the room go dead silent. Then ask him to pay your bills. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder thick with documents. I spread them across the dinner table like I was dealing cards, each page landing with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the silence. I've paid $63,000 to this family over the past 2 years, I said, my voice steady and clear. Damian's business loans, your mortgage, his car payment, even his credit card bills when he overspent on vacations and restaurants. Damian's face went white. He picked up one of the bank statements with trembling hands, staring at payment after payment with his name in the memo line. Monthly mortgage payments, $3,000. I continued, pointing to each document. Damian's loan payments, $800 a month. Car payment contributions, $500 a month. Random emergency payments when Damian needed help, $12,000 total. Dad was frantically flipping through the papers, his confident expression crumbling as he realized every payment was documented, every lie exposed. Damian, I turned to my brother, who was still staring at the evidence in shock. You had no idea I was paying your loans, did you? He shook his head, tears starting to form in his eyes. Archie, I thought Mom and Dad were helping me. I didn't know the money was coming from you. Of course you didn't, I said. Because they wanted you to think you were special, that you were successful, that you were better than me. I turned back to my parents, who were both trying to speak at once, scrambling to explain away 2 years of financial manipulation. You want to know the real difference between Damian and me? I asked, my voice getting stronger with every word. I've been supporting this entire family while Damian plays grown-up with a job that pays less than what I make in 2 weeks. The silence that followed was deafening. My trauma paramedic income is $95,000 a year, I continued. Damian's startup salary is $40,000, but you spent 2 years telling everyone that he's the successful one while I'm still figuring things out. Damian was crying openly now, the weight of the truth hitting him like a physical blow. He'd been living off my money while looking down on me. His entire lifestyle, his debt-free existence, his financial freedom to focus on his career, all of it had been built on my work, my sacrifice, my paychecks. Archie, we can explain, Dad started. But I held up my hand. No, I said firmly. You can't explain away 2 years of lies. You can't explain why you took my money to pay his bills while telling me I'd never be as good as him. You can't explain why you celebrated his success when it was funded by mine. I gathered up the documents and put them back in my folder. The payments stop now. Damian can be as good as he wants with his own money. I walked out that night and never went back to those family dinners. Within 2 weeks, I'd accepted a promotion to paramedic supervisor in Boston, making $120,000 a year. The hospital that hired me valued my experience, my dedication, and my skills. They treated me like the professional I'd always been, not like the failure my family had convinced themselves I was. My parents started calling within days, but I didn't answer. Damian left voicemails begging me to reconsider, but I was done being their safety net. Word spread quickly through our small Massachusetts town. Extended family members started asking questions. Aunts and uncles who had always praised Damian began to whisper about the truth. At the next family gathering, I made sure everyone knew exactly who had been paying for what. The respect I'd never received from my parents suddenly came from people who understood the real story. My cousin Mark pulled me aside at the gathering. I had no idea you were supporting everyone. We all thought Damian was this business genius. That's exactly what they wanted everyone to think, I replied. While I was working double shifts to keep them afloat, they were taking credit for his success. The shame on my parents' faces was visible to everyone. They could no longer pretend their golden son was self-made when the receipts were public. Damian's girlfriend started asking uncomfortable questions about their future finances. She'd assumed his debt-free status was permanent, that his family wealth was real. When she discovered the money had always come from me, and that I was cutting them off completely, their engagement began to crumble. I can't marry someone whose lifestyle was built on lies, she told him in front of everyone. I thought I was marrying a successful businessman, not someone whose brother was paying his bills. Damian begged her to stay, promising he could maintain their lifestyle on his own salary. But $40,000 a year doesn't buy the life I'd been funding. My parents' house started showing signs of financial stress within months. The mortgage payments I'd been covering weren't being made. Late notices arrived. The bank began foreclosure proceedings. Dad called me crying, something I'd never heard in my life. Archie, please. We're going to lose the house. Can't we work something out? You told me I'd never be as good as Damian, I said calmly. Ask him for help. But his salary can't cover what you were paying. Exactly. Maybe you should have thought about that before spending 2 years telling everyone he was more successful than me. I hung up and didn't answer when he called back. Damian's business partnership collapsed when his startup ran out of funding. Without my financial support covering his basic expenses, he couldn't afford to work for equity and promises. He had to take a regular job paying $35,000 a year, barely enough to cover his own rent and car payment. The wedding was canceled. His ex-girlfriend moved back to her parents' house, telling everyone who would listen about the financial deception. Damian became a cautionary tale in our town about fake success and family manipulation. Meanwhile, I was thriving in Boston. My new colleagues respected my expertise. My supervisor role came with additional responsibilities I loved. For the first time in years, I was working in an environment where my contributions were valued and acknowledged. I made friends who had no connection to my family drama. People who saw me for who I was, not as someone's disappointing brother. I started dating a fellow healthcare worker who admired my dedication to saving lives. She couldn't understand why my family had ever made me feel inadequate. You're one of the most competent people I know, she said. How could they not see that? They were too busy creating a fantasy about my brother to notice reality, I explained. 6 months after I cut them off, the family home went into foreclosure. My parents had to move into a small apartment, their coastal mansion seized by the bank. The life they'd built on my earnings was gone. Damian moved back in with them, unable to afford his own place on his reduced salary. The three of them were cramped into a 2-bedroom rental, their pride shattered along with their financial stability. The extended family stopped inviting them to gatherings. The shame of their deception had made them social outcasts. Relatives who once admired their successful son now whispered about their financial manipulation and lies. I heard about their struggles through mutual connections, but felt no sympathy. They'd created this situation with years of favoritism and financial abuse. I was finally free to live my own life without carrying their burdens. My new apartment in Boston had a view of the harbor. I furnished it exactly how I wanted, without worrying about sending money home. Every paycheck was mine to spend or save. The psychological weight that had pressed down on me for years was gone. I didn't wake up dreading family phone calls or guilt trips about money. I didn't have to pretend their treatment of me was acceptable. I'd built boundaries they could never cross again. Damian called me one last time, 8 months after our confrontation. His voice was broken, desperate. Archie, I can't keep up. Please, I need help. I'm drowning in bills. I listened to him sob, remembering all the times I'd sobbed alone after their dismissive treatment. You know what's funny? I said quietly. You spent years thinking you were better than me. Now you're begging me for help. I'm sorry. I didn't know they were using your money. I thought I was successful. You weren't successful. You were subsidized. There's a big difference. Please, I'll pay you back. I'll do anything. I thought about all the times I'd asked for respect, for acknowledgement, for basic consideration. How they dismissed my achievements while celebrating his mediocrity. Damian, I said, using the same cold tone Mom had used on me so many times. You'll never be as good as me. Then I hung up. The irony wasn't lost on me. The brother they'd claimed was destined for greatness was now begging the failure for salvation. The dynamic had completely reversed, but I had no interest in playing their games anymore. I'd learned that true success wasn't about being better than someone else. It was about building a life where your worth wasn't dependent on other people's approval or financial manipulation. My career continued to flourish. The Boston hospital promoted me again, this time to department coordinator. My salary increased to $140,000 a year. I was managing teams, implementing new protocols, and making decisions that affected patient care across the entire emergency system. The recognition I'd craved from my family was abundant in my professional life. Colleagues sought my advice. Supervisors praised my innovation. Patients' families thanked me for the care I provided. I found love with someone who valued my character over my family's opinion of me. We built a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. She never made me feel like I had to prove my worth or compete for attention. A year after leaving Massachusetts, I received a wedding invitation. Not Damian's. His engagement had ended permanently. This was from my cousin Mark, who wanted me at his celebration despite the family drama. I decided to attend, curious to see how my absence had affected the family dynamic. The wedding was beautiful, held at a vineyard in western Massachusetts. I arrived wearing a custom suit, driving a car I'd bought with money that would have otherwise gone to my parents' mortgage. I looked successful because I was successful, not because someone else was funding my lifestyle. The reaction from my family was everything I'd hoped for. Relatives who dismissed me for years were suddenly interested in my career, my life in Boston, my obvious prosperity. They could see the confidence that came from finally being free of toxic relationships. My parents looked older, worn down by financial stress and social embarrassment. They watched me from across the reception hall, but didn't approach. They knew I'd built a life without them, and it was thriving. Damian was there with a new girlfriend, someone who clearly didn't know about his past. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, knowing his current modest lifestyle paled in comparison to the image he'd once projected. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, but I felt tremendous satisfaction in my own rise. I'd proven that success doesn't come from being someone's favorite. It comes from hard work, integrity, and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your worth. At the reception, several relatives apologized for not seeing the truth earlier. They admitted they'd been fooled by the family narrative about Damian's superiority and my supposed lack of direction. You were always the responsible one, my uncle said. We just didn't realize how much you were doing behind the scenes. Sometimes the person working hardest is the one nobody notices, I replied. I left the wedding early, not out of discomfort, but because I had a life in Boston that was calling me back. A life filled with meaningful work, genuine relationships, and the peace that comes from self-respect. The 3-hour drive back to the city gave me time to reflect on how completely my life had changed. 2 years earlier, I'd been trapped in a cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation, desperately seeking approval from people who were determined never to give it. Now I was free, successful, and surrounded by people who valued my contributions without needing proof or documentation or years of sacrifice. I've learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is walking away from people who can't see your worth, no matter how much evidence you provide. The family who'd lost me that day at the dinner table had never recovered, but I'd never been stronger. I'd stopped paying for other people's dreams and finally started investing in my own. The brother they'd claimed would never measure up had built a life they could never touch or diminish again. Looking back now, I realized my greatest revenge wasn't destroying them financially. It was thriving without them. My parents lost their home, my brother lost his future, but I gained something far more valuable. Peace with myself. I'd spent years seeking their approval, measuring my worth by their standards, accepting their narrative about my inadequacy. The moment I stopped participating in their dysfunction was the moment I started living authentically. My life in Boston continued to expand. I met people who'd never heard the story of the unsuccessful brother because that story was fiction. They saw me as I was: competent, caring, successful, and whole. I bought a house overlooking the harbor, something I never could have afforded while funding my family's lifestyle. Every room was decorated with my choices, every decision made for my happiness. I'd learned that family isn't about blood relations or shared history. It's about people who see your value and support your growth. The people who treated me as expendable were no longer my family in any meaningful sense. The colleagues, friends, and partner who celebrated my achievements had become my chosen family. The moment I stopped paying for their dreams was the moment I finally started living mine.